So now what we're going to do is looking at factoring a number of different examples just to help reinforce the concept that we've been looking at. So we'll take a look at this first example here in the upper left-hand corner. It says x squared plus 9x plus 8. So again, we have to look for two numbers that are going to multiply to, in this case, positive 8, and they have to add to positive 9. So they have to multiply to positive 8. They have to add to positive 9. So again, I'm going to look through all the factors of 8. So 1 times 8 equals 8, and 1 plus 8 equals positive 9. So hey, I just found it. Okay. So sometimes it can be very quick and doesn't take you very long. Other times it's a bit more tedious. So x plus 1 times x plus 8 will work. Okay, and if you expand that out, you'll get the same answer. If we look over here in the upper right, here's a slightly different one. In this case, our c value is actually negative. So we know that the two numbers are going to multiply again to a negative number. Okay, that means that anytime that you have two numbers that are multiplying, if one of them is negative and the other is positive, you end up with a negative number. Okay, so we know that we're looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 24 and that add to positive 2. So I'm going to start looking through factors of negative 24. So they have to add to positive 2, and they have to multiply to negative 24. So positive 1, negative 24. Well, multiply those two things together, it gets me to negative 24, but not going to work. So this is going to end up, if I add those things together, that gives me negative 23. Positive 2 and negative 12. Well, that gives me negative 24, but when I add them, it gives me negative 10. 3, positive 3 times negative 8 will give me negative 24. And when I add them together, that gives me negative 5. Positive 4 times negative 6. That will give me negative 24, but if I multiply, or if I add them rather, that gives me negative 2. Okay, so I can keep going, but I already know what some of these things are gonna result in. So instead of having the first number be positive, let's try the second number be positive. So if I actually switch this and I put in negative 4 times positive 6, that also multiplies to negative 24, but that adds together to be positive 2. Okay, and you'll notice that when you switch the signs, you end up with the same number, but a different sign in front of it. Okay, so positive 4 times negative 6 gives me negative 24 and adds to negative 2. Negative 4 plus positive 6 gives me positive 2. So in this case, this is the section that I'm looking for. So this tells me that x minus 4 times x plus 6 is my factored form of that particular equation. If I look down to the next example, I need two things that are going to multiply to negative 8, and they have to add to negative 7. So again, they have to multiply to negative 8. They have to add to negative 7. Okay, so I'm going to do negative 1 times positive 8. If I add those things together, that ends up at positive 7. So if I need negative 7, I'm going to flip it. I'm going to do positive 1 times negative 8, and that's going to end up as a negative 7. So that tells me that this factored form is going to be x plus 1 times x minus 8. Next example here, you'll notice I don't actually have a number that's in front of the x, and when you don't have a number in front of the x, what that means is that the number is actually 1. So it has to add to negative 1 and multiply to negative 12. So in this case, multiplying to negative 12, it's going to add, oops, going to add to -1. So 1, -12, that's going to give me -11. That's not going to work. 2, -6, that's going to add together to give me -4, so not going to work. 3, -4 gives me -12, and when I add those two things together, I end up with, hey, look at that, -1. So this is the piece that I want. So this tells me that I'm going to use x positive 3, x minus 4. Okay. The next example, I've got two more to do. I've got two numbers here. They're going to multiply to -6, but they're going to add to positive 5. So multiply to -6, add to positive 5. So 1 times -6 is -6. 1 plus -6 is -5. Okay, so let's try the reverse of that. So -1 and positive 6, again, they multiply to -6, but when I add them together, it gives me positive 5. So here, I've got to have x minus 1, x plus 6. And then my final example, probably going to need to break out my calculator for this one. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to -64, but that add to -12. So 1 and -64. Okay, well that ends up at -63. 2 and -32 multiply to -64, but when you add them together, that gives you -30. Let's try 64 divided by 3. Does not divide evenly, so I'm not going to use that. So -64 divided by 4 gives me 16. So positive 4 and -16. If I add those two things together, it gives me -12. So this is what I'm looking for. This is the line right here. So I'm going to have x plus 4, x minus 16. Okay. So you have to recognize that with us, when factoring a simple trinomial, you're looking for two numbers that are going to multiply to the c value, and those same two numbers must at the same time also add to the b value. Okay, and we use our MA chart in order to solve for that.